Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, July 14th, 2021. I'm at work. I don't know. I was just admonished because seconds before air, because I'm a multitasker, I retweeted one of the SFDB gun fail posts that are, of course, just hanging out there waiting for me to label them gun fail. And I did that, and the mighty OCD says, hey, get to work. And, of course, I'm always at work. The only difference between having a show and not having a show, or being on the show and not being on the show, is whether or not the microphone is on. Or I guess the real difference is I can turn the microphone on anytime. Whether Justice will turn the microphone on, and he's only agreed to do that during this 2-hour window, you see. But if it were my channel, I guess we could just leave it open, and I'd leave open the microphone. There'd be a show all day long. My wife and family beg me every day to stop the show for the other 22 hours a day. And I don't know. I guess they also beg me, if you're going to do this, you might as well be either streaming it or recording it, and can't you find some way to monetize it beyond what we've done with our donations program, which, by the way, is a damn sight better than nothing. I will say that. We've been doing very well. I need to update the donations pitch. I mean, we definitely can use more. We always could. And, we still severely underpay Scott for the time that's involved anyway. He professes to take a certain pleasure in listening to the show and actually being compensated for it. And I don't want that idea to spread too much, because a lot of you will probably demand reparations for having to listen to this show if you thought you could get them. But we'd like to be able to pay more. We'd like to be... it would be nice. It wouldn't be nice if we could send Greg a gift every once in a while, too. That might not be a bad idea. He does this out of the goodness of his own heart, and who knows when that could run out. I mean, I don't know if there's a finite amount in there. Donald Trump, clearly a genius because he has billions of dollars allegedly and was president of the United States, says our energy is finite like a battery. That's why he doesn't exercise, and perhaps we should all take note of that and conduct our lives accordingly. We won't run out of news. That's a renewable resource. Stupid things happen all the time, and reporters report on them, and we read them to you like it's something you need to know. So no shortage of that. But yes, thanks everybody for your continuing donations. You make it possible for me to save face in discussions at home, like, why do you do this? And couldn't you be, I don't know, taking out the garbage or mopping the floor or something useful instead? And then I can point to the amount of money that comes in. And although it, no one was looking to become a millionaire off of this, but at least it pays for computers and streaming and hosting and things like that, and gives us the flexibility to toss around a couple of bucks for Scott every once in a while, who I think has the hard job of summarizing what it was we did on the show. It drives me up the wall. I can't do it myself, so I look for help elsewhere. Now, no compensation either for Bill in Portland, Maine, who daily tweets the morning startup tweet for us. Let's see what's on tap today. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. Correct so far. You get a point for that. Kagro X, that's me, so there's another point for that. 400 points on your SAT so far. Kagro X reports that the Senate is reportedly in agreement on a $3.5 trillion infrastructure bill. This is true. The budget bill, I guess, largely now at this point considered an infrastructure bill. So congrats to Gladys Higginbotham of Poughkeepsie on your new $3.5 trillion sidewalk. It shovels itself, so it's a high-tech thing. Fantastic. I don't know what we're going to do with the rest of the infrastructure projects that need help, but you can all go and marvel at the Higginbotham sidewalk, certainly, and take pride in that as an American. All right, well, we are ready to roll. Plenty to do here. Greg is already and still gathering up his Raft O stories. Speaking of Raft O stories, I did put away in pocket a piece from the Columbia Journalism Review that actually uses that term, raft of things, and something we've been talking about. So once again, we're ahead of the media curve here. Even though the piece I've put aside is titled, or I guess runs under the column heading of the media today, I told it to you yesterday or several days before. But anyway, I mean, it's not news. Everybody noticed. The piece is titled "The Tedium of Trump Books News Cycle." The Trump Books News Cycle, just noting the raft, and they used the term raft, of Trump books that have been coming out in the last couple of days. And I saw that floating around. I saw Empty Wheel, Marcy Wheeler, commenting on the phenomenon again, just noting for the record, wouldn't it be great, or her joke was, why don't I start a Substack, that newsletter that's dedicated entirely to things that happened 4 years ago, but I waited to monetize and tell you about later. It's kind of annoying, but that's kind of where we are in the cycle of news reporting outlets. People are just finding ways to monetize it, and it means sometimes holding the best stories back, although I think a lot of that has to do with editors worrying about them being published at the time under their banner. They don't mind so much if Simon and Schuster take the rap if the things go wrong. All right, we'll check in with that later on, because we'd just be wasting time doing it now, because Greg's standing by and waiting to roll. So, hi, Greg. How you doing?
Okay. Well,
All
I
right.
have a contribution for that genre.
Oh, good. You wrote a book.
I have others to contribute to, but I have a contribution to this current one here. And that is that Julie K. Brown, you remember her. She's an excellent
VJ
investigative reporter for the Miami Herald and broke the Jeffrey Epstein scandals, among other things.
Uptown Julie Brown. Yeah.
So she wrote a book, and it's supposed to be embargoed till tomorrow. But The Guardian and then Esquire with one of their great reporters, whose name I'm blanking on because I couldn't get through the paywall to read it.
Well, it's not
Charlie
your fault,
Pierce.
then. Oh, okay.
Wrote about this, and The Guardian, which is accessible, headline says, Ken Starr helped Jeffrey Epstein
yes.
with Scorched Earth campaign, book claims.
Well,
Ken Starr, the lawyer who hounded Bill Clinton over his affair with Monica Lewinsky, waged a scorched earth legal campaign to persuade federal prosecutors to drop a sex trafficking case against the billionaire financier Jeffrey Epstein, relating to the abuse of multiple underage girls, according to a new book. In Perversion of Justice, the Miami Herald reporter Julie K. Brown writes about Starr's role in securing the secret 2008 sweetheart deal that granted Epstein effective immunity from federal prosecution.
Well, we know about the deal, and I knew Ken Starr was somehow involved, but now, well, that'll be interesting to read about.
The book says the emails and letters sent by Starr and Epstein's then criminal defense lawyer, Jay Lefkowitz, show that the duo were campaigning to pressure the Justice Department to drop the case. Starr had been brought into center stage because of his connections in Washington to the Bush administration. So he had connections that would help DOJ lay low on this.
Well, I mean, obviously the guy with money is going to take every avenue he can to do that. But yeah, Ken Starr, boy, was this? I don't know whether. I guess maybe this is related to the release of the book. He was in another news story that made it to my attention yesterday that I wasn't necessarily going to spend some time on, but I guess an attorney who worked on. Or who worked as a PR consultant, I guess, during the impeachment trial, and then afterwards worked continually with Ken Starr and Brett Kavanaugh in that capacity, was writing about her experiences working around the both of them. And part of the reporting was that she had an affair with Ken Starr. I don't think it was during the impeachment trial for President Clinton's affair, but just sort of, I mean, the fact that it was afterwards, I don't know if that's worse or not, like to go through the impeachment trial and then, unless you do when you're can do this and get away with it.
You do professional hypocrite level things.
Yeah,
right?
I guess so. Right. This is hypocrisy at the highest levels, right? Exactly. The guy has made it to the upper echelons. He's going to have to do it full blown. Well, I'm not going to even forget it. You know what? This segment is over.
Right. So the article ends
my
by
God.
pointing out Starr's handling of sexual assault scandals has dogged him during other phases in his career. In 2016,
Yes.
as a reminder, he was stripped of his presidency of Baylor University after the institution under his watch failed to take appropriate action over a sexual assault scandal involving 19 football players and at least 17 women.
Yow.
And then 4 years later, Starr served as a member of Trump's legal team, as you point out, in the former president's first impeachment trial over dealings with Ukraine. Of course, Starr didn't have any problem with Epstein, with Trump, with other people who have sexual issues, but when Clinton does
That's all fine.
that's all fine,
Okay.
Anyway,
Boy.
so that's in the news, and that's one of those books I might wind up reading. I bought
All
a couple of those books on the Trump era that I haven't cracked open yet, but I'm sort of interested in getting to at some point.
Well, it sounds like
One
you got
from
a
the
summer
Washington
ahead,
Post
yeah?
about how they handled a pandemic, and a semi-related one on the Democratic side of things by Ed Burke, Isaac DeVere, The Battle for the Soul Inside the Democrats' Campaigns to Defeat Trump. Sort of interested in those sorts of things for a number of reasons, including what's the best way to approach, dealing with fascism and whether there's any clues in there.
Oh.
So the two themes I have
Tell you
today
after. Yeah.
really are one is the pandemic. I think I'll put that aside for the moment. I led with that on Monday. I'll do that second.
Okay.
And the one that strikes me first, actually, is the ongoing fascism problem here. So a couple of things. This is Lee Drutman, who's a political scientist, was pointing out that there's a new study showing experts rating Donald Trump's continued refusal to accept the results of the 2020 election as highly abnormal and
That's
important.
True. I agree with that rating.
Right? There's even a chart.
Okay. All right. So that's
Okay.
an official rating. If there's a chart, that's a rating.
Semi-important, mostly important, or important. Semi-important are things like Trump starts blog after social media bans. Mostly important things like COVID relief passing on party lines.
Okay.
Because you'd think COVID would be a nonpartisan thing.
Yeah.
Or empty green removal from committees.
Yes.
That sort of thing. Mostly important.
All right.
Very important, that is to say important.
Yes.
In political science talk, important is very important.
Everything. Jeez.
Texas Democrats walking out over Republican voting law. Trump continually rejecting the election defeat. Cyber Ninja hired to audit Maricopa results.
Are they not done
Trump
yet?
claims audits will reinstate him. State legislatures, not lags, state ledge,
Oh, I see.
passed laws restricting voting access.
Leg.
Republicans ousting Liz Cheney. That all happened. Those last things that I just read, those all happened like together. They just happened like in a bunch. And it stands
Yes.
out because the more important things are happening more frequently and more recently.
Yeah. I feel like we've always been had a flood of it, but I guess that's supposed to illustrate the fact that you're in trouble with fascism.
So Lee
Sounds
Drutman,
right.
a political scientist, looked at this and says lots of abnormal and important events in a relatively short time frame.
Okay. Yeah.
These are not normal times. We should not pretend otherwise. These are times that demand our acknowledgement that things are different now and there's no path back. The only path is through.
All right.
That's pretty good, right?
Yeah.
But I think that should also be read at the same time with some other things that go together with. For example, there's David Frum writing about fascism,
All right.
and he's got a big article in the Atlantic about that.
Oh, I'm out of articles at the Atlantic. So
Yeah,
okay.
I know. Then we're getting to that time of the month where I'm out of articles on a lot of different things. That's why I didn't read the Charlie Pierce thing from Esquire.
Some of
There's a
the
word for what
Ides.
Trumpism is becoming,
Okay. And that is.
and that word is, it looks like you have to buy some vowels to fill in the word. The relentless messaging by Trump and his supporters has inflicted a measurable wound on American democracy. And, the third thing that I linked with those other two stories is a local-ish story out of Michigan that Joe DeSana retweeted from Freep. Back the Blue, a man accused of plotting to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer said he wanted to kill cops, quote, as many of those mother effers as I could.
Oh.
Prosecutors allege, though the defendant doesn't want jurors to hear any of that.
I believe that allegation.
Yeah, the defendant doesn't want the jurors to know that he tried to kidnap her, and also wanted to kill as many people as possible. Because, if that's inadmissible, he's got a much better chance of getting off.
Right, absolutely. That'd be a great way of handling your case if you could get it that way. Look at that. I'm looking back at that David Frum article where they have the hangman style blanks.
Well, it's just like Wheel of Fortune. Yeah, but it's hangman style. Missing.
But the thing is, S has already been guessed in this, and I don't understand.
That's why. Because they haven't finished filling it in yet. It's a good looking graphic that doesn't quite match the rules.
Right.
But that's what happens with fashion.
FA blank.
They make their own rules.
C blank SM. So if S has been guessed, but we don't know that they're playing hangman. It's just this is a person who spells words in an unusual order.
I spell them the way I want.
Not the first letter to the second to the third. Just, okay. All right. Well, there you have it. Sorry, I didn't mean to derail it, but that was like, wait a second.
No, it is pretty interesting. It's in a pretty interesting article, and I don't think it needs extra discussion because we all know what's going on there.
Right. I did it anyway.
But the Detroit Free Press says not only does the defendant not want the jurors to hear, they want to take out a lot of cops.
Yeah.
His alleged cohorts who are fighting to keep the jury from hearing those comments, which are part of a video the prosecutors want to show jurors when the case goes to trial in October. So we still have to wait a long time. According to the government, the video captures defendant Brandon Ceserta expressing frustration with law enforcement and government and allegedly instructing his co-conspirators if they encounter police during a reconnaissance, they should give the officers one opportunity to leave, kill them if they don't comply. And the defense says that's got nothing to do with alleged plot to kill the governor, kidnap the governor. That was just tough talk by angry citizens, venting his frustration over traffic tickets.
Oh, I see.
The defense argues the video is irrelevant, unfairly prejudicial, and has nothing to do with kidnapping the governor.
All right. Did they bring guns on the effort to kidnap the governor? Probably to deal with the cops.
I'm not a lawyer. All I'm saying is this is one of the reasons why it takes so long to bring stuff to trial. You got to adjudicate this stuff even before you get there.
Right. Like the Kraken hearing yesterday. It took them hours to get through getting to the conclusion that those guys were nuts.
Whatever happened? What was the conclusion?
I don't think that they've concluded anything in terms of whether or not to sanction them.
We know they were lying and they were crying over it.
Yes.
But, what happened?
I think they used the time successfully to, at least some of them got extra time to write more briefs about why they shouldn't be sanctioned. So literally they just tied the whole thing up in knots for 4 hours, even though really they just all should have been cracked over the head with a gavel directly by the judge. They were able to, even though the judge showed no inclination to believe anything they had to say, they ended up successfully getting the judge to say, all right, well, write me another memo about why you shouldn't be sanctioned, but only 10 pages. That's a great illustration of how you draw these things out and why it does take so long. Everybody knew what was supposed to happen yesterday, but we're going to have 10 more pages on it first.
So when you have a situation like that,
I have one. Yes.
Where you have essentially dysfunctional government because a large and powerful enough faction is fighting with the rule of law, it makes it very difficult to go ahead and do stuff and get stuff done.
Right. Yes.
And this is relevant for climate change. Ana Cabrera from CNN points, California officials tell CNN they anticipate nearly all the salmon in the Sacramento River will die due to abnormally hot underwater conditions as the heat wave continues.
They're poaching.
And another person on Twitter, Mark Elliott, notes, just drove through the Central Valley yesterday. It's an oven. For those of us on the East Coast who are unaware or only pay attention once a day, it's big issue out there and ongoing. And then, of course, the pandemic itself, where trying to vaccinate people hits a roadblock because you have a organized faction, often in power, fighting the very concept of vaccination. Yeah. And that is not an exaggeration. That just happened in Tennessee, where the person who was in charge of vaccinating folks, including teenagers, was just fired because Tennessee has decided that they're no longer going to promote vaccinating teenagers, period. Not
For
just
anything.
for COVID, for
Right.
anything.
No more vaccinations, which
It was my job to
what you
provide
need.
vaccine access so Tennesseans could protect themselves against COVID-19. I've now been terminated for doing exactly that.
Awesome.
I am afraid for my state. That's Tennessee's former top vaccination official, Dr. Michelle Fiskus, was fired on July 12th amid questions on youth COVID-19 vaccines.
Well, I don't know what to tell you. I mean, the good people in Tennessee ought to escape, I guess, and just leave the idiots to themselves, except, they'll all cross the border on errands and make the rest of us sick. So, bad situation. Can't condemn Tennessee as a whole, of course, because there are some people who would desperately like to escape who can't, but you just have to shake your head and watch what happens, I guess. You got no choice. Because
Michelle Fiskus said this week she was
I guess.
forced from her job after writing a memo describing a 34-year-old legal doctrine that suggested some teenagers might get vaccines without their parents' permission. That happens in a lot of states.
I've read about it happening.
If you have an adolescent clinic, you're having adolescents there who are seeing the docs without their parents, and that's because adolescent medicine, which is a branch of pediatrics, essentially, if you want to sum it up, it's sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And if you want to have a frank talk with your doc, you have to not have your parents there.
Yeah, I guess so.
That's the deal. That's the whole way it's structured. So the idea that you could actually even get vaccinated without your parents' permission, there's a lot of things you can do without your parents' permission.
Oh, I mean, I guess I just probably a lot of parents think that the default rule is, well, until they're at least 18, you have to ask me about everything, but I guess that's not actually
state
so.
by state, it depends.
Okay, well, the laboratories of democracy, what are you going to do?
Dr. Fiskus' memo came out suggesting that some teenagers might get vaccines without their parents' permission. That came out as conservative lawmakers in the state were lashing out at efforts by her agency to raise awareness of vaccines among teenagers. One Republican lawmaker, why is it always Republicans? Scott Sepicki, Cepicky, Scott Sepicki,
Sure.
Sepicki, accused the agency of employing peer pressure to prod young people into getting immunized.
Well, if they're not peers, it's other kind of pressure, but all right, it's not peer pressure.
In a lengthy and searing statement describing her
encouraging
departure,
peer
Dr.
pressure.
Fiskus said the actions of lawmakers have gravely endangered the public by undermining confidence in the vaccines, even as virus cases are rising in Tennessee, and as concerns about the Delta variant are emerging in parts of the country. More on that after the break. But so you have a situation where you have a refusal to accept the results of the election when you lose, trying to arrest Democrats in Texas when you win, trying to make sure that nothing can happen. There's agreement amongst Democrats on a way to go forward with infrastructure, because, it's infrastructure week again, with a reconciliation deal that's half of what Bernie Sanders wants and probably twice as much as what Joe Manchin wants. But all of that stuff is happening, and so as it happens, what happens? The Republicans pull back and say, oh, my gosh, they're actually capable of governance. How can we stop this?
Yeah.
So now there's talk of the Republicans pulling their support for what's been called the Bilateral Infrastructure Framework, or BIF, if you see that in the news, a horrible acronym that nonetheless is getting some currency. Hopefully would go away fairly quickly.
Bilateral Infrastructure Framework.
Yes, because they don't have exact numbers yet. But in any case, some of the Republicans who say they support it say, well, if the Democrats go ahead and pass their bill, we can't support this one.
Yeah.
Well, what's one thing got to do with another? You knew all along.
Yes, they love that story.
That they were together. Yes, but, we were supposed to get the political cover of doing this in ignorance as if the other one didn't happen. And then we could say, oh, my gosh, I'm shocked and surprised that this other thing happened. I had no idea. And that fig leaf has been pulled from them because it was a stupid fig leaf to begin with.
Yes, it was. And now these bills will be connected in a different way. If they say they are going to withdraw from the BIF, then I suspect that
then we will no longer be
Yeah.
BFF.
Right, that's
So,
right.
You
They'll
know,
just move the stuff
a quick
over.
thread from Perry Bacon before the break, because
okay.
I think this is like putting a finger on what's going on here.
PB. Yes, go ahead, PB.
That's PBJ.
Right. Well, is
It's
he
Perry Bacon Jr.
That'd be great. Save that name. All right.
Right. It's very popular. Everybody loves PBJ,
Sure.
especially for lunch. In 2017, Collins, Murkowski, and a few other Senate Republicans, like Dean Heller, remember him, communicated in 1,000 different ways they were wary of repealing Obamacare. McConnell kept rewriting and revising the repeal bills. Trump publicly demanding the passage of Obamacare repeal. McConnell called a vote on one of the repeal bills, even though it wasn't clear that the votes were there. Remember all this stuff? When a vote was actually called, very few Senate Republicans, like Collins, Murkowski, McCain, were willing to actually vote down a major priority of the party, something its core activists and president were pushing intensely. So a lot of Republicans didn't want to do this. They knew it would be a political disaster.
Yes.
Remember all the stories about how Democrats are going to save Republicans from themselves, yada, yada, yada. Collins, Murkowski, and McCain killed the bill, but they also pissed off a lot of people in the party. They weren't going to be able to keep blocking major GOP priorities. So when they complained about some elements of the tax bill, McConnell ignored them, correctly concluding they couldn't vote down the health care bill and the tax bill.
Okay.
Collins behaved for much of the next 3 years like somebody who had used their break with the party on a big issue card, including the supporting Kavanaugh. So flash forward and understand that the pressure on Manchin and Sinema matters, and they may be dragging their feet on voting rights, but they're not going to vote everything else down. Don't worry about them on infrastructure. That's the bottom line there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, I think that's a pretty good conclusion. Probably true.
But also, it's okay to put pressure on them, because that's what keeps them in line.
Yeah, and that's your job.
Sup fam, it's your boy Darwin, aka Darwin_Darko, aka the most reasonable man in America, aka KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We continue with Greg's working. We got everything in during the break, including before the break, including our impromptu PBJ joke, which I don't know whether Perry Bacon has kids or not, but someone should call him and let him know.
Bacon. You said bacon.
Yeah. Oh, bacon.
So he's really smart, and he was publishing at 538. Now he's over at Washington Post, which I'm very happy about because he's got some pretty good insights.
All right.
So Matthias Schmidt tweets, huge breaking news. The EU Commission proposes an internal combustion engine ban from 2035. Within 14 years, no more gas-powered cars.
Wow.
They're not really banning the cars. They're banning CO2 emissions.
Oh, okay. So if you can...
Right. So if you can figure out how to have an internal combustion engine that doesn't produce CO2, good luck. You're in.
Yeah, I mean, call me if you got one. I'll go in.
But it's a de facto ban for the internal combustion engine as we know it.
So
the proposal for 2030, which isn't that far off, it's only 9 years, which was previously a 37.5 reduction over 2021 levels, has been increased to 55%.
Okay.
So that's pretty interesting.
The last 5 years after that would be everybody switch over to something else, like this electric.
Right. So we're having heat waves, and there's nothing you can do about it. Actually, there's something you can do about it, and Europeans are starting to do stuff about it.
Yeah.
So, hopefully those efforts will accelerate. David mentioned to me an item that I had noted about the idea of putting white cloth over glaciers.
Yes.
To reflect the sun back so that they don't melt so fast.
Yeah, a tarp. I didn't come up with the idea or anything. And if I had, I would have kept it quiet because you can't put tarps over. But they did. In Italy, I don't know. They've got at least one glacier, and it's now underneath a enormous white tarp in an effort to save it. I just saw that in passing yesterday, and I understand that they had lost something like 1/3 of the volume of the glacier in the last 10 years or so, and decided to do something about it. A huge umbrella didn't work, so they went with the tarp.
Right. And I recalled a visit to Alaska just a couple of years ago, standing in an area which was for visitors. It was one of those, places you could stand where you can get real great shots of the glacier in
overlook.
The distance over the mountain, which wasn't that far away. And the area that we were standing and the parking lot to get to the area where we were standing had been covered in the glacier just a decade ago.
Yes, these things are retreating.
So you could see it.
Run and see some glaciers if you haven't.
Right. And, of course, that was one of those places where the glacier was making its own weather. Just as the heat wave is making its own weather.
Yeah. All right. Well,
up in Canada, the heat wave had fires, which created tornadoes, which changed the weather, which had lightning strikes, which only made more fire, which made the weather worse. It was like one of those video games where you have to stop it before the mad scientist wins.
Wow. Yeah. I saw this morning. I think the weather app served me up a video about the orbit of the moon changing, although that didn't have anything to do with climate change, except insofar as it will, play havoc with
that's because Lex Luthor bought real estate on the far side, to create Lutherville, and he's got to change the orbit to make it a little bit more.
It's wobbling. It's a cyclical thing. That apparently was already happening, but it's going to affect the tides, and we go through a decade-long apparently cycle of higher high tides and then lower high tides, and basically you'll be having rising ocean levels and then a 10-year period of higher high tides on top of it all because of this wobbly moon that we've got. Somebody ought to fix that, and it'll just exacerbate the problem.
Right. So next in my raft of articles that I wanted to discuss, sort of in a similar theme here, was an essay by Tom Edsall.
All right. Well,
they publish him every week, but keep calling it a guest essay. I mean, I don't know how often he has to publish at the Times before he's not a guest anymore. But
it's guess essay. We're trying to guess when he'll stop.
Lean into it. Lean into the culture war.
All right.
Should responsibility for the rampant levels of polarization that characterize American politics today be laid at the feet of liberals or conservatives?
I see. Okay.
I posed that question to my friend Bill Galston, a senior fellow at Brookings and a columnist at the Wall Street Journal. He emailed me his reply. And Galston is like the definition of centrist. If you're looking up centrist in the dictionary, it's like Bill Galston's pictures next to that definition there. He emailed me for his reply. It's fair to say that the proponents of cultural change have been mostly on offense since Brown v. the Board of Education, while the defenders of the status quo have been on defense. But once the conflict enters the political arena, other factors come into play. Galston argues intensity makes a huge difference. On many of the cultural issues, including guns and immigration, the right is more intense than the left. Galston puts it like this: when being right or correct on a cultural controversy becomes a threshold issue for an intense minority, it can drive the party much further to the left or right than its median voter. Now, before we get into the rest of the article and what some other people say, I want to go over this quote because Lawrence Glickman had something to say about it. It's fair to say that the proponents of cultural change have been mostly on offense, while the defenders of the status quo have been on defense. And Glickman says that's an interesting column, but I disagree with some of the framing. Take out proponents of equal rights and put that in where it says cultural change. It's fair to say that proponents of equal rights have been mostly on offense since Brown v. Board of Education, while the defenders of the status quo have been on defense. Well, that changes everything. You look at that and say, well, one side is correct.
Yeah, I guess so, right? It's not that
It's
we're
not the
worrying
wishy-washy
about the
both sides
culture.
stuff.
It's the culture is supposed to be here. We were always supposed to be about equality, and you haven't been living up to it.
And so the rest of the piece here, too long didn't read, is really about the fact that some folks are arguing that, well, if you look at a Pew study, it shows that Democrats have moved left further than Republicans have moved right. Therefore, people pushing change are pushing too hard, and you shouldn't be doing that.
Wrong. Okay.
But the political scientists who know what they're talking about look at that and say that's the wrong way to read that, including the people who actually did the Pew study.
Well, yeah.
They say that's not what's going on here.
Okay.
Okay. What's going on here is that Republicans have become more partisan than Democrats. And the reason the Pew study makes it look as if Democrats have moved more to the left than Republicans have moved to the right is because the entire country has moved left. And again, if you substitute in the idea of equality being the core issue that's doing this, and by the way, I don't know if you knew this, but some Democrats aren't white.
Oh, right. Yeah, I did know that.
If you look at equality as being the core issue for this, and the entire country has moved left, naturally the Democrats have moved with them. The Republicans staying where they are and not moving is the problem, not that the Democrats have moved more left than the Republicans have. The center of the country has moved left.
It's a relativity problem.
Yes. And if you don't recognize that, you're going to misread what's going on here and say, oh, well, the Democrats are moving too far too fast. No, the country is moving far and fast. Republicans aren't keeping up with them. That's the problem.
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
hey, Ryan
it's
Enos,
all
the
moving.
political scientist at Harvard, took this argument a step further. More importantly, I think we should question whether the culture war metaphor is appropriate. War gives the idea there are aggressors trying to change society to match the preference. But much of the change in opinion we see is a reaction to society changing around them.
Okay, yes. True.
Right?
Right.
Democrats moved to the left on gay marriage because more of them were beginning to know gay people who had come out of the closet despite the legal and social pressures not to. And Democrats moved to the left on immigration because the Western world is diversifying. On these and other issues, Democrats' attitudes change not because they're trying to shape society, but because they're merely reacting to it.
Right. Okay.
Right? In Russia, you
The
shape
reactionaries.
society. In U.S., society shapes you.
I guess that's true.
It is true. And so if that's
well,
what's
no wonder.
happening, you're looking at the data and reading it wrong.
Okay. This happens from
Right.
time to time.
And so, it's just that
Like
it's
this
important
column.
to keep all of that in mind, and that's all part and parcel of this. And so when you have somebody or something or some entity, whether it's Trump or the GOP or conservatives or white evangelicals who are the base of the Republican Party, whatever it is, trying to do stuff that's antithetical to what the rest of the United States is doing, whether it be vaccine or voting rights or whatever, then you have these issues. And it's not that the Democrats have moved too far left. It's that the Republicans refuse to move at all.
And
Joe
you get
Biden
left
gives a
behind.
speech about it yesterday. Have you no shame? Biden frames voting rights as a moral reckoning. Yeah, there's a lot of, you have to back that up with stuff which hasn't happened yet, but it's all part of that big picture. Okay, and so is the Tennessee firing of the person who's trying to do vaccines. In that vein, by the way, I put together just a series of 4 or 5 articles I found in the last day or so, and I called it the I Wish I Had Known thread, a subgenre.
Okay.
Right, just some of the headlines here. He wished he had gotten the vaccine. Local man battling COVID-19 from ICU was the only one in his family not to get vaccinated. Now he remains in a hospital ICU more than 3 months after contracting COVID. That's from WSB-TV.
Womp womp.
Here's another one. Get the vaccine. Anti-vaxxer changes mind after severe COVID-19. Maryland grandmother Linda Mercer had refused to be vaccinated. She wondered whether the vaccines were effective or safe, and now she sort of wishes she got it. Here's one
She found out
from
it was
News Nation
effective.
Now. Missouri couple regrets skipping vaccine after COVID-19 hospitalization. After spending 5 days in a hospital battling COVID-19, Missouri couple is urging others to get vaccinated.
Yeah.
This is from Deseret. Why this COVID-19 vaccine skeptic regrets his decision. Family nurse practitioner Aaron
why.
Hartle wasn't in any hurry, even though he treated patients with COVID-19. And they have a picture of him in a wheelchair being released in Provo.
That's the answer.
Right? All changed in June after COVID-19 sent Hartle repeatedly back to the emergency room before he finally ended up in the hospital for a week. The 45-year-old former triathlete and father of 5, 3 of whom caught the virus from him, remains on oxygen and tires easily as he talks about an ordeal that didn't need to happen.
Okay.
Okay, and then there's more. They wish they knew. Unvaccinated hospitalized patients say they regret their decision. That's from NBC News. I have empathy, and I see this as a public health failure. I wrote when I was putting these together. At some point, people have agency and responsibility, but at the same time, the decisions affect the rest of us, which makes me a conservative communitarian.
I guess so.
I recognize it's your decision and you have agency here, but you're screwing all of us.
Yes, which is why I'm staying home, so that I don't interact with you and have the opportunity to get screwed by you and your bad mistakes. This is, I mean, we've been reading this for a long time. This is all relatively current stuff, and just probably the 4th round of these things. And earlier the stories were, I would tell you, we would have interviewed the guy about his regrets, except he's dead. Now these people are at least surviving and living to tell you what their regrets are. But before we had to interview the widow or widower or parents of the deceased and let them be the ones to express their regrets. So I guess we're making some progress, but yeah, still the same.
Still the same. I have 2 last stories about the pandemic and vaccines that I want to go over because this really sets the public policy and public health issues fairly well. The first one is from the Washington Post by Dr. Jha, who is Dean of School of Public Health at Brown.
Dr. Jha. Nice. Paging Dr. Jha.
And this one is Vermont's and South Dakota's COVID infection rates are remarkably similar, but the outcomes are not. Yes. 2 states, 2 different paths. True. Together they offer invaluable lessons about the road ahead for the nation, especially as infection rates creep up because of Delta. 2 states are Vermont and South Dakota. Both feature among the 3 states that COVID Act now classifies as falling in the lowest risk category along with Massachusetts, and that would be a surprise. While New England states are known to have done extraordinarily well in vaccinating the population, South Dakota's in the middle of the pack. What explains the fact that South Dakota has infection numbers almost as low as Vermont? Well, start with some basics. Vermont and South Dakota share important similarities. Both have relatively white, older, rural populations.
Yes.
Comparable median incomes. Both states have Republican governors.
True.
Okay, challenging the notion that COVID risk is a partisan phenomenon. And over the past 2 months, the rate of infection in Vermont and South Dakota have appeared remarkably similar. Both states have seen steep declines in cases, making both states near the best in terms of infection per population. But that's where the similarity ends. And by the way, a Republican acting as a Democrat, is good.
Yes. I don't know
that's
if
what
I understand.
Vermont has. But this is where the similarity ends. While nearly 75% of Vermonters have had at least 1 vaccine shot, putting the state near the threshold for herd immunity, only half of South Dakotans have had 1 shot. South Dakota's substantial population immunity comes in large part from prior infections, particularly during the fall with Sturgis.
Yes.
With little to no interest on the part of its governor to squelch the outbreak, South Dakota reached the highest levels of infection seen by any state during the pandemic. At its peak, the state was reporting 160 new cases per 100,000 residents, and Vermont was reporting 30. Unsurprisingly, the states experienced stunningly different outcomes. Adjusted for population, 6 times as many people died in South Dakota, nearly 6 times, from COVID-19 as in Vermont, 230 versus 40. And in real numbers, while about 250 Vermont residents died from the disease, more than 2,000 South Dakotans did. And as of today, Vermont has a lower unemployment rate, suggesting that there need not be any trade-off between public health and the economy. Now, by some estimates, nearly half the people of South Dakota may have been infected.
Yes.
And these infections led to huge amounts of suffering beyond the deaths themselves. You can count the deaths, but you have to look at long COVID, some of this, I wish I had done it differently, people talking about the fact that they're still sick. Yeah, the virus isn't going away. And while governors had to make decisions with little federal guidance and little historical precedent, and that's why I bought the Washington Post book about how the Trump administration approached that pandemic, by the summer, it was much clearer how to curtail the disease, protect public health, and by following the science, Vermont saved an enormous number of lives. South Dakota did little to protect its residents. And it's important to learn from those things. Perhaps an even more interesting look comes from Kaiser Health Network in an article they entitle Red State, Blue State, Twin Outbreaks. Yeah. Dr. Jha looked at Vermont and South Dakota. This is looking at Wyoming and Colorado.
Uh-huh.
And they also have anomalous COVID spikes. Okay. And the interesting thing is Wyoming has a COVID spike in their rural area because not that many people are vaccinated. Colorado is a well-vaccinated state.
Generally.
But you have to look at what's going on below the surface to see what's going on. And this article does a nice job in capturing the cultural differences that East Coasters just sort of may have blow by them because they don't really know. Mm-hmm. Here's what I mean by that. Brandon Graves said COVID-19 arrived in Wheatland, Wyoming, the way new movies do in this high plains farming town, months after hitting the big cities and without much fanfare. Kind of trickled in.
I see.
Said Graves, a lifelong resident and mayor of the town of 3,500, which is the largest town in the county. Many residents say the virus that causes COVID had felt more like an inconvenience imposed on them by outsiders than a public threat. For instance, utility bills came late because the company that prints the bills is in a city that was hit hard by COVID.
Yes.
And the town is stuck repairing and re-repairing one of its aging trash trucks because the ordered replacement's been delayed by more than a year because of a COVID-induced shortage in microchips. And then there's the Colorado Navy. That's the locals' nickname for the parade of vehicles with boats in tow that cross the state line each summer. They come from Colorado, and they go into Wyoming to go boating. The numbers swelled last year as people searched for lakes and campgrounds open during the pandemic.
Yes.
Right? Wyoming was open. Campers were packed so tightly around Gray Rocks Reservoir, a popular fishing spot outside of town, it literally looked like a city. The crowds trashed the place. Rancher lost several cows because plastic bags were found in their stomachs. I wonder why they don't love outsiders.
Yeah. Well, should have gone to Lake of the Ozarks, guys.
I suppose, right? It's no surprise many residents are lukewarm to the idea of COVID vaccines. As of July 6, about 29% of Platte County residents are fully vaccinated, according to the state health department. And Wyoming, a staunchly conservative state, had about 32% of residents fully vaccinated, giving it one of the lowest vaccination rates in the nation. And the state also has one of the highest new case rates.
All right.
So that makes sense, right? You go, okay, well, fine. They didn't vaccinate. Now they're paying the price, and now they have high rates. But look at what happened in Colorado, just to the south.
The boat people. Yeah.
The boat people, the Colorado Navy. Okay. And I'm going to give you just this little image that comes with the piece so you could place geographically where these places are in relation to each other. They're not far from each other.
Okay.
Colorado's a Democratic-leaning state whose population is about 53% fully vaccinated, placing it in the top 15. Mm-hmm. It had the 12th highest rate in new cases among states as of July 9th, ranking a few states lower than Wyoming. And within Colorado, one of the most vaccinated counties is San Miguel County, which, like Wyoming's Platte County, has a population of about 8,000 people. Both counties entered June with high transmission rates and sustained them for several weeks straight, but the vaccination rates are inverses of each other, low in Platte County, high in Colorado's San Miguel County. But the common thread in both places are pockets of unvaccinated residents, and here's where it hits more home when you're looking at the Northeast. Health officials are keeping a close eye on hotspots that have emerged in recent weeks tied to low vaccination rates. One of the things we've been sounding the alarm about is the need for hyper-local data, said Jennifer Nuzzo, an epidemiologist with the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. The state could look fine, and you think, no big deal. We got this. But then when you drill down at the county level, you could be seeing a much different story. And the county level might not even be granular enough to show true risk. Small upticks in cases can be meaningful even in sparsely populated counties, and not just because of the potential for transmission to spill over to other places, Small rises in cases in rural areas can have devastating consequences because chances are there's fewer healthcare resources in those places in order to save lives. There's been good studies that show that partially the ability of the virus to kill people depends on the bandwidth in the health system to save people. So if you have a rural health system that's already strained, maybe your hospital closed and you have to go to the city. We talked about a scheme to band together and run to the city to pick up pharmacy prescriptions for when the town pharmacy closed. I think we did that last week.
Oh.
If you're in a rural area that doesn't have the robust health systems that other places have, you can be real in a world of hurt real fast.
Yeah.
The other thing that happened here is that San Miguel County isn't uniform. San Miguel County hit President Joe Biden's vaccination goal of getting at least one dose into 70% of adult residents before July 4th, but the county was experiencing a surge in COVID similar to that of Wyoming. A reason it turns out not everybody was enthusiastic about the vaccines.
Aha.
Numbers provided by the local health department showed that on the county's east side, home to the affluent ski resort community of Telluride, about 80% of eligible residents opted in. On the west side, what residents call the West End, only half did. That left the county vulnerable to continued spread. That east-west divide reflects a pre-existing cultural divide, according to the county manager, Mike Bordogna. The sparsely populated west side, which stretches to the Utah line, was historically the county breadbasket. That's the rural area.
There they are, yes.
Growing crops and livestock that fed mining towns like Telluride, now known for skiing and its film and bluegrass festivals. So again, the cultural divide is there. Local reporters pick up on it. If you're looking at a national reporter trying to cover what's going on in Colorado, they just look at it and say, oh, isn't this interesting? San Miguel County has a high rate. I wonder why. And locals say, well, that's because that side of town is vaccinated and this side of town isn't.
I guess that's all it takes. And
yes, and that's all it takes. And because that's all it takes, every decision that the GOP makes to try to block vaccines or downplay them or talk them down matters. And it's going to show up.
Yeah, right. Well, it's my choice. I can do whatever I want, and I understand that. And they love taking up the slogan previously used elsewhere of "my body, my choice." But you put your body in enough circulation,
right? So people are refusing in the rural areas to get vaccinated, but county leaders are holding out hope that some will have a change of heart. They're going to try to get vaccination stations set up at the upcoming county fair and rodeo to make it easy for people to get inoculated without worrying about being spotted.
Yeah, get off the
goal is to create a system in which attendees can tell a family member they're heading for the bathroom, get a shot, and go back.
Well, that's better than trying to vaccinate them in the middle of the rodeo.
Yeah, meet them in a back alley by a guy who's wearing a trench coat.
All right. This is going to be tough, Doc, but you got 8 seconds.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Man.
So, it's a cultural divide that for those of us on one side might not see, but it's there. And again, I have empathy for people who were holding out, and I'm sorry that they were wrong, but they were getting misinformation. And now it's part of our collective job to do something about it.
Yeah.
And just hopefully they won't be part of that, I wish I would have done it differently chain that's unfortunately getting longer and longer. And with that, I'm done. It's Wednesday. Got to go get Abby before the sanitation engineer comes by.
Yes, and he's coming because your trucks work because they have the replacement parts they need.
Yeah, so hopefully everybody's vaccinated.
Interdependency.
Here. And I got my haircut yesterday, and for the first time, you didn't have to wear a mask. It was optional.
Oh, what did you opt to do?
I opted not to wear a mask because I'm fully vaccinated, and I happen to know everybody in that place, and there were only 3 people in the place when I was there. I know them all. It's a small town, and they're all vaccinated. And I know that because it's a small town.
Yeah. All right. It does make it easier to get your hair cut right if you don't have those strings in the way. That's helpful. So, okay. Good. And, it's a fascinating way of telling the story. I also just found it, the one-off I took away from the rural story there was that most frequently when you're interviewing the rural residents, they're going on and on about how the big cities couldn't exist without the rural farmers sending their goods out there and keeping the city running. And here we just found out, what also doesn't run when you don't have two-way communication? Rural areas, because you don't have parts for your trucks and your mail doesn't get delivered because the place that prints the letters and the checks and whatnot is elsewhere. You are interdependent too.
Yeah,
so
but at the same time, if you're going to kill my cows by coming out here and playing tourist, I ain't going to like you.
That's true, right. And despite the fact that the cows have the 4 stomachs, you only have to have a plastic bag in one of them, I guess. So,
it's all good to remember.
Don't
people are
plastic,
different and they have different sensibilities, and be empathetic and outvote them when you can't convince them. It's as simple as that. Take care, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. I'm sure other stuff will come up.
All right, yeah. We'll try
hopefully
to stop
not more fascism, but you never know.
Well, that's likely to happen, but it'll all happen. It'll all be important and recent. Just like
and don't worry about Manchin and Sinema. On the one hand, they generally vote Democratic, and on the other hand, put pressure on them if you can, because there's nothing wrong with that. And since you can't, since you don't live in West Virginia, then put pressure on Biden. That's fine.
Right, or move there.
It's good. It's all part of the deal here.
Okay.
Just don't be fooled when Republicans say, "Oh my gosh, I had no idea they were doing this other big bill. I have to vote no now."
Yeah, that's nonsense.
Democrats' answer to that is going to be fine. If you want to vote no, I'll just throw it all into the reconciliation. You'll get no credit.
Yeah, I think that's what is likely to happen. I wonder why whether that's why
that was
went
always the
down.
case. That was always the 2-track thing.
Yeah.
It's heads I win, tails you lose, and you get to pick.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Right? I'm going with heads I win. I would like you to vote for this bipartisan thing, and then we'll do the other thing that you don't like later. But if you want to do tails you lose, that's your choice.
You're not going to pass the bipartisan thing? All right. Well, we'll just do it all in reconciliation.
Or just do it this other way.
Okay. It's not a bad plan. All right. Well, probably about time for the trucks to show up because they're working, although I haven't heard anything yet. Should we just wait until Abby barks or what? I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, they could be 3 minutes late today, but that's the deal anyway. So goodbye, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Okay. And sorry for talking through you as I always do. I just had a lot of stuff to go through.
No, it's much easier to do things this way. And
no, it's just, I just don't care. Yeah. I'm doing it anyway.
Right. Well, I mean, if I told you it was a great convenience, you'd say, all right, fine. What do I care? But if I told you it was a problem, same answer.
David and I are old friends. We can do this.
Yes, and we're it's not just because we're old. We also, like you said, have been friends for quite a while, and we weren't young when that started either. All right. Thanks, Greg. We'll catch up with you tomorrow. Hope everything goes smoothly, and I don't know. It'll be fascism tomorrow nonetheless, but at least we'll know where to put it on the chart. And we'll be back in just 1 minute to carry on. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We continue on. I have a feeling that maybe we ought to jump it back to the Ken Starr thing, because everybody might not be up to speed on this thing, because there was a lot of Ken Starr news. And as we said, the first part of it that Greg brought us up to speed on was just sort of his continued involvement in, reactionary Republican politics, and then the connection to the Epstein case. And now you'll learn all about that in book form. And I don't think I can fault this delay. I don't lay that at the feet of the reporters in this case, because, of course, all of this information was developed after it was too late to stop Jeffrey Epstein from doing what he was doing. And even so, it forced a re-examination of the case in a way that, generally speaking, came out right, although Epstein, I guess, took the easy way out of the whole thing, unless you believe that somebody else opened the door for him to take or gave him the easy way out, and maybe it wasn't even all that easy. But at least some of his partners in crime face accountability. But there was more Ken Starr news than just that. Let me see if I can switch over to that. I've got a couple of different lines on where this comes from. I saw it yesterday being circulated in... let's see, where is it? I might have to refresh my pocket page to get to it. Here in Medium. which is sort of like the self-published, blog-style self-published tale from Judy Hirschman, who is the person who had the affair with Ken Starr. But then I see it's been picked up since then and reprinted, republished, linked to in several newspaper sources, etc. But I guess we'll go to the original source on this thing. And I tried reading through it yesterday just to try to get to the question of, was this affair ongoing during the impeachment trial? Because that would just be too amazing and ironic, even though he wouldn't be the first for us to have found out from among the Republicans who were prosecuting the case against Bill Clinton to have been having an affair at the time. That was the case with Newt Gingrich, for instance, and we're still not rid of him. But I think this actually happened afterwards. But that wasn't even the chief revelation of the story. It was, I guess, chiefly about Brett Kavanaugh. But who knows? I don't know. Maybe it wasn't even chiefly about him. It might have been. I don't know whether they were trying to go chiefly. I guess we could ask Judy Hirschman here. Who were you aiming at? Because the headline of this is Ken Starr, Brett Kavanaugh, Jeffrey Epstein, and me. So if the order in which she put them in the headline has anything to do with it, then I guess Ken Starr is the main target. But it's hard to see who does worse in this telling of it. Oh, why don't we get to the telling of it in case you haven't seen it? As a former professional partisan, Judy Hirschman writes here, I never thought I'd look back decades to my political beginnings and find the map that points to our current moment, where there is serious doubt whether the democracy we took for granted at the time will continue to exist. Despite all the posturing and gamesmanship, and at times skullduggery back then, the political opponents in general, political opponents back then, shared an understanding that the process enforced by our Constitution would prevail, no one would get everything they wanted every time, and the state of our union would remain strong. I guess that was everybody's assumption. As it turns out, too many people like me stuck our heads in the sand, swallowed our doubts, let the unacceptable slide, convinced ourselves it was in the interest of the greater good, and never dreamed that we would look back and realize that a failure to say enough had led to our country's biggest existential crisis since the Civil War. This is a I have regrets story, just like the chain of I have regrets stories that Greg shared with respect to the COVID-19 vaccine. Seems similar in nature almost. But this is another, I guess, longtime Republican coming to the, in a roundabout way, to a sort of a never Trump stance. But this has to do with never Kavanaugh, never Ken Starr, never Trump, never all the things that Trump brought about, except, this is a very interesting and illustrative article because there are, of course, plenty of never Trumpers. Maybe this is what we really should take away from it, is that there's nuance to never Trumpism as well. And this isn't offered up as, I don't think, as a never Trump kind of an article. And it's not entirely clear whether she comes to this new conclusion about how wrong everyone was before it's too late and becomes a never Trumper, at least in 2020 or not. I don't think that's actually even discussed. But anyway, it's just sort of interesting. And I also think of all the never Trumpers who are still nonetheless Republicans and have stuck to their guns in terms of the conservative positions they still believe in. They just hate Donald Trump versus others, and who I guess, like for instance, is Jennifer Rubin. I guess does she still consider herself a Republican? Perhaps. Yeah, I haven't seen her swear that off, but I've also seen in the course of her never Trumpism, it seems like there's been an evolution in her thinking about political issues as well, but not enough for me to trust her exactly. Just enough for me to occasionally enjoy seeing are appreciating the fact that she was writing such a thing and saying, gosh, that seems weird coming from Jennifer Rubin, and that's the extent of it for me. Anyway, back to this narrative about Starr, Kavanaugh, and Epstein, and of course, Judy Hirschman. So, I entered what I now see as our long national unraveling during the Clinton impeachment as an advisor to independent counsel Kenneth Starr, and over the next couple of decades, as I remained personally and professionally dedicated to him. Only in the last 3 years, so I guess probably we know how she may have voted in 2020, but not 2016 necessarily. Only in the last 3 years, thanks to the hold of an unhinged liar and mega grifter on my party, I think we know who that's supposed to be, and so it seems my old mentor, have I been able to recognize that Starr has been at the intersection of so many wrong turns our country has made. I don't know how many people actually recognize it. I mean, when you say it that way, everybody says, oh yeah, Ken Starr. Well, they may even recognize more than one of those wrong turns and say, yeah, he is at the on the wrong side of history in a number of places. But she really recounts how many there are, and I guess, we'll be convinced by the end of the article. Where were we? Yes. And now, as he attaches himself to a new presidential prospect and joins former Vice President Mike Pence at a family leadership summit in Iowa this coming weekend, I don't think I was aware of that happening, it has become clear to me that I am morally, indeed patriotically, obligated to speak up for the moral decency of the moral decency my old mentor, Starr, continues to violate in the name of, ironically enough, moral decency. It is undeniably fitting that this account should turn on the cliche of the scarlet letter. For somehow, Starr's role as the nation's parson always comes back around to sex. Perhaps his fascination was heightened early on by his involvement in the Packwood Diaries scandal. I think we forgot about his involvement in that at all. But most notably, of course, was his 1998 pursuit of former President Clinton, well, then President, but now former President Clinton, over his sexual relationship with a White House intern, which was bookended by his recent impeachment foray, this time defending an adulterous president who lies about so much more sin than that. And in between, he zealously took up the cause of a Supreme Court nominee accused of sexual assault, Kavanaugh, Jeffrey Epstein, a Baylor University football player accused of rape, and even, and I don't think I remember this at all, a school teacher in suburban Virginia found guilty of molesting 5 young schoolgirls. It's linked in case you want to find out the details on that one. And even still, in 2021, he published his latest book extolling the virtues of intersecting religion and the judiciary. I was stunned by anybody extolling the virtues of this. Starr is all in for ramming the most extreme of white conservative judges, experienced or not, that will decide human fates based on Christian beliefs into federal life-tenured seats. Forget the separation of church and state. That's not what the Founding Fathers intended, according to him. Now, she goes on to say, I can date the beginning of my own rebirth to July 9th, 2018. That is the day Donald Trump nominated Brett Kavanaugh to be an Associate Justice on the Supreme Court. I sent Starr a text saying, you said to me 20 years ago that Brett was, quote, going places. Clearly, it was my first communication to Starr in memory that went unanswered, and I wondered if he picked up that my message had a bit of an edge. I had met Kavanaugh in 1998 when he was a 33-year-old member of then independent counsel Starr's team investigating Bill Clinton, and I was a 39-year-old strategic communications consultant hired to help prep Starr to present Congress with his legendary report detailing Bill Clinton's sexual interactions with a Monica Lewinsky. I don't know whether she meant to keep the A in there to give us some sense of our not having any idea who that person was way back then, or whether that was supposed to come out, because now we all know who Monica Lewinsky is. Anyway, one day after meeting at the Independent Counsel offices, I was alone in a conference room collecting materials when Kavanaugh entered. He began berating me and invading my personal space in a deranged fury that sent me into flight around the table. After I invoked Judge Starr a few times, a deflated Kavanaugh left. But I felt duty-bound to report the incident to Starr. I think I need more detail exactly about this incident. And she glosses a lot. I don't know if she's glossing it over, but she leaves a lot of stuff out here that makes me think, like, I don't understand. What do you mean after I invoked Judge Starr a few times? Like saying, Judge Starr won't like this? And there's also, like, I don't understand even why he would be berating her. She was in a conference room collecting materials. And then he comes in and berates her, like, how dare you collect materials? I don't think so. So there's a lot of context missing here. I'd be curious about what she's being berated about. Not that I think any of it would be excused by that. I just, like, it makes it sound like he just comes in and randomly berates a woman because she's a woman, which may or may not be exactly what he was doing. He's a weird guy, but I feel like there's plenty of context missing that would still paint him as a horrible, abusive person. And I'd like to know that. Anyway, so she runs around the table, and eventually, after she says, I guess, the name Judge Starr enough times, he says, yeah, he's my mentor too, and maybe I should stop attacking this woman or something, or for my own good. Starr reacted after she reported, right? Remember, as she goes on to say, she felt duty-bound to report the incident to Starr. As my client... Remember, she's consulting with him at this point on communication strategy. As my client, he needed to be informed about anything that might raise a red flag, and my pulse rate told me that this was one. Starr reacted with seeming surprise, saying Brett was probably being protective of him, and moreover, was destined for great things, possibly the Supreme Court. Not that I'm sure why that would have anything to do with it exactly. Like, that guy just totally freaked me out and ran around and chased me around the table in the other room, berating me. Well, he was probably being protective of me. Again, I need more context. What would he be protecting him from? From a communications consultant that was working for him? That doesn't make any sense. And then, of course, well... The other part makes a little bit more sense. Like, basically, don't make problems for him. He's destined for great things, possibly the Supreme Court. She says at the time, or recalls saying at the time, not if he treats women like that, he won't. I replied. I then asked Ken to seek an apology from Brett on my behalf, and was told, I'm apologizing to you for him. This is it. So very interesting that Starr is being so protective of Kavanaugh at this stage of the game. He's only 33 at this point. Hence, my text to Starr in 2018 acknowledging his prediction. As Kavanaugh's confirmation process proceeded, I had no plans to come forward about that encounter. But by the way, I want to pause at this point to remind everybody, as we did yesterday, in a certainly slightly different context, that Kavanaugh, at the time of his confirmation hearings here in 2018, is already a sitting member of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals. Again, as I've said a number of times, widely regarded as, I guess one of two or three contenders to being regarded the second highest court in the land. Certainly a Supreme Court feeder circuit, the D.C. Circuit. So he's already an extremely important appellate judge, probably on track, even if he hasn't yet been nominated. Because he's on the D.C. Circuit, everybody considers him a comer for the Supreme Court at some point. And I point that out only to say that it's only after that's the case that she begins to realize something really, is wrong about promoting this guy and we should do something about it. I guess she had I don't know if she describes any thoughts of possibly intervening or speaking up, or that there might be just something worth knowing during his confirmation hearings to the D.C. Circuit. Apparently nobody wanted to intervene in that. It's only when you get to the Supreme Court that people wake up. And I understand why, but we really have to be doing a better job than that. Anyway, she wasn't doing a job at all for us, our side. So, I don't know. But anyway, I guess the point is, when he was being nominated to the D.C. Circuit Court, she was still a good Republican operative and didn't tell anybody about her misgivings about his judicial demeanor at that point. She was perfectly happy on behalf of the Republican Party to land him there and groom him for the Supreme Court, even though she had even more reason than most of us to know that that's likely where he would end up. And she really could have helped put the kibosh on that at an early stage. Don't let him on the D.C. Supreme or Circuit Court. Anyway, as Kavanaugh's confirmation process proceeded, I had no plans to come forward about that encounter, so even then, she had nothing to say about it. Though I found Christine Blasey Ford credible when she described being assaulted by Kavanaugh as a teenager, I wasn't sure about the relevance of my experience, which, though quite aggressive and unsettling, was not physically violent, and I did not suspect it was alcohol-fueled because at the time I didn't know that Kavanaugh had been a well-known blackout drunk in college. I mean, that almost actually seems a little bit unfair. She didn't think it was alcohol-fueled because there was no evidence that he had been drinking, I guess, at the time, and it was the middle of the day in the office, and I don't think anybody ever said that he frequently spent time at the office drunk. So anyway, she's taking a shot at his college background, but hey, boo-hoo. These things happen. It was only when I saw his snarling refutation, and that's in quotes, of Blasey Ford, that I realized that his almost feral belligerence in that conference room more than 20 years earlier had not been a one-off. So now she begins to see it as a pattern with him. After a sleepless weekend of pacing, planning, and crying out of sheer heart sickness over what was happening to my country, I submitted a statement describing the incident to 2 Democratic senators and 2 Republicans, including Jeff Flake, the Arizona senator, who had succeeded in postponing the vote on Kavanaugh until the FBI conducted an investigation, and that should be in air quotes, investigation into the mounting charges that were far more serious than mine. The next day, on Wednesday, October 3rd, I texted a message to Starr via his now deceased good friend Tim O'Brien, a former ABC News reporter who had covered the Clinton impeachment. I knew O'Brien was with Starr and his wife Alice on an annual bike trip that a group of friends had been taking for years, this one to Croatia. And I suppose you could be excused for jumping out at this point and saying, so the guy who was covering the Clinton impeachment is a good enough friend of Ken Starr's that they're on a bike trip to Croatia, just one of several that they've done over the years together? I mean, was that bad? I don't know. Was that something they were doing during the impeachment trial? That I don't know either. But, maybe they became friendly afterwards. I don't know. It does raise some questions, though. Anyway, I had been on the bike trip through Tuscany in 2009. Early one evening, while our spouses were at dinner elsewhere, Starr had stepped out from the shadows of the grounds of the inn where we were staying and called me over. Uh-oh, it's getting ominous now. After expressing his feelings for me, he pulled me into an embrace. Oh boy. This was the beginning of a fond, consensual affair that I had every intention of taking to the grave, even if it probably wasn't an accident that I chose O'Brien, of all my friends on that Croatia trip, to send my text to during the Kavanaugh hearings. When I had drawn back from that first kiss in Italy, and that was, again, in 2009, so well after the impeachment, but still, would probably raise questions in your mind. But I guess it took her another 9 years to, break through and figure out what was really going on here. Anyway, When I had drawn back from that first kiss in Italy, I noticed that O'Brien was looking at us from the balcony above. Though I can't be sure O'Brien could see that Starr had taken my hand and placed it on his crotch, there can be little doubt that he saw the kiss Starr had initiated. I guess O'Brien knows now. Holy moly. And when I expressed to Ken my horror at having been observed, he had said, "It's okay. He understands." 9 years later, I was reasonably sure O'Brien would relay my text message to Starr. I guess so. Although, I don't know. Whatever. Anyway, man, that's kind of ugly, the whole thing. I look back on that text now with a bit of compassion for my naive faith in my political party's better angels. I would like for Ken and Alice to know that I pray for Brett to step aside, and I hope Ken can look him in the eye and release him from this for the sake of his family and this country, I wrote. I had a problem with Brett 20 years ago. Ken knows. Murkowski, Coons, Flake, and Hirono have a statement from me about what happened. The FBI is not involved. The press is not involved yet. My God, Brett is not right. Do what you think is best. That's not really a super strong statement, is it? I also left a voicemail with O'Brien in a trembling voice. I thought that if I could slow this crazy train for just a few days, more would come out about Kavanaugh, and they would decide he just wasn't worth it and move on. After all, there were other potential appointees in the queue, including Amy Coney Barrett. They could have just switched over to her at that point, right? That, of course, is not what happened, though Tim did indeed get my text, according to the red notification that I received, and he returned my call, or rather, left me a message saying he saw I called, never mentioning the text. But that callback came early the following week, and the vote to give Kavanaugh his lifelong seat on the High Court had already taken place the previous Saturday, October 6th. Whether Starr had any coordination with the Kavanaugh team in Washington, I don't know. And in any case, those advisors had bigger brush fires than me to put out, like the potential witnesses to the nominee's alleged exposed penis at Yale. Boy, it's getting hot in here. Goodness. But yeah, again, I guess at this point, I don't know. I don't know how I feel about her realizing this only when he was being appointed to the Supreme Court. I mean, he was a lifetime member of a very, very important court already, and she had never, she doesn't evidence any hesitation about having him on that court. I dealt with my dismay over Kavanaugh's confirmation by going to North Dakota soon after to work for the re-election campaign of Senator Heidi Heitkamp, a vulnerable moderate Democrat, made even more so by her principled vote against him. There I met several women and men from all over the country who came because of Kavanaugh, and like me, not all of them were Democrats. While Heitkamp was losing her seat on Election Day, November 6th, my account of my 1998 encounter with Kavanaugh was the most read story on Slate.com. I think I missed that at the time. My editors had to call Starr for comment, and I was stunned when I read his statement in print. I do not recall any mention of any incident involving Brett Kavanaugh, was surprising enough, but the ensuing embellishment went way beyond lawyerly parsing and into the realm of falsehood. The quote is, "To the contrary, throughout his service in the independent counsel's office, now Justice Kavanaugh comported himself at all times with high professionalism and respect toward all our colleagues." Could he really have written that with a straight face after an older and presumably wiser Kavanaugh had just demonstrated the opposite of high professionalism and respect while auditioning for one of the highest offices in the land? Had, in fact, just repeated the very explosive behavior of which I had accused him, both at the time it happened and in the Slate article. That Starr, this man I had for so long respected, and at the time still did, had basically called me a liar in print, made me begin to re-examine my entire association with him. There was the time in January of 2010 when I saw him in California. He was then dean of the Pepperdine, I guess they say, Pepperdine University School of Law. Do they say it funny in any way? I mean, I think we got that right. It's not hard to pronounce, I hope. And he asked me if on my next visit to South Florida, I could extend myself to counsel a very wealthy, very smart businessman who got himself into trouble for getting involved with a couple of underage girls who had, of course, lied about their ages. He throws in there, and I guess we know by this point we're talking about Jeffrey Epstein, but in case you missed it, it then goes on to say, I confess I did not recognize Jeffrey Epstein's name at the time, but I knew what statutory rape was, and I couldn't understand why Ken Starr would be involved with him. Is this a church thing? I asked. Are you trying to cure him? Air quotes. Why would you do this? It didn't occur to me that he might have been part of the legal team that executed a secret and egregious sweetheart deal for the convicted pedophile. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Yeah, more gross stories about Ken Starr and Brett Kavanaugh, and of course there aren't anything but gross stories about Jeffrey Epstein. But setting the scene again, this is the encounter between the author Judy Hirschman and her then mentor Ken Starr in January of 2010, when he asks, hey, would you perhaps consider swinging by South Florida and helping out with this Jeffrey Epstein guy? Because, of course, he is a very wealthy, very smart businessman who got himself into trouble for getting involved with a couple of underage girls who lied about their ages. 400 times they lied about their ages. Mr. Very Smart Businessman couldn't figure it out in any of them. And couldn't you help out? And then she's wondering, is this like a church thing? Do you know him from church? Epstein? Maybe. And are you trying to cure him? Why would you even do this? It did not occur to me that he might have been part of the legal team that executed a secret and egregious sweetheart deal for the convicted pedophile, or that the stickler for details I knew Starr to be might be grossly undercounting the victims in question. Very grossly, in fact. Everyone deserves representation, Judy, he said, like that was something she had never heard of before, right? Adding, he promised to keep it above 18 from now on. Wink, wink. Like that. Why would that promise mean anything to anybody at all? Great. Tell your lawyer that, but why bother telling the communications consultant? What is that? Something she's going to tell the papers? Anyway, according to an alleged victim statement after the fact, the middle-aged child molester, Jeffrey Epstein, did not keep his sex with girls above the age of 18. What do you know? Womp womp. At my core, during the Clinton impeachment, I knew that what the Starr team was doing to a young woman not much older than 18, Monica Lewinsky, was wrong. Yet I fell for Starr's mantra, which he repeated in 2018 on NPR when he was promoting his book, Contempt, which in a nutshell is where he vacillates between his deep disdain for the Clintons and whining about the reasons he's not on the Supreme Court. No one is above the law, and what we're really talking about ultimately is obstruction of justice and the abuse of power, Starr told me back then. She brought this on herself, Monica Lewinsky, I guess. She should have cooperated. Somehow, he managed to maintain his missionary image, no pun intended, down to making me smile by proposing cocktails. And how does Ken Starr, suave guy that he is, propose cocktails? Apparently the quote is, "Shall we have a sarsaparilla?" Okay, Dad. Great. Whatever, man. Jeez. Shall we have a sarsaparilla? Sure, I love sarsaparilla. You can't get it anywhere anymore. No one knows what it is, but whatever. We're olds, so we understand it's a joke. Okay. Shall I put your hand on my crotch? Well, that's a little less wholesome than sarsaparilla, but wink, wink, I guess. That's what sarsaparilla means for him. Our affair ran its course after a year or so of occasional encounters and a steady exchange of affectionate texts and emails. Super hot. No fireworks, no drama. I remained his advisor and supporter, and he mine, and we continued to talk frequently. Later, when I was living and working in Texas, I tried to help him weather his beleaguered tenure at Baylor. And then, in 2016, when he was fired as a result of a rape scandal involving the college football team, I ran interference for him as best I could. It was an interview. It was, in an interview that I watched in 2020 with one of Baylor's aggrieved accusers that helped me understand how I could have been blind for so long to the pattern of misogyny coursing through Starr's career. Describing a meeting with Starr about her ordeal, she said that he shed a tear along with her, made her feel heard, but did nothing to help get justice for her or the many other female students who came forward with allegations. Unless you count what he said in one interview, the quote being, "We grieve for what happened, but that doesn't mean that you can't say it's a new day." That's the biblical perspective that we try to live up to here at Baylor University. Shamelessly and effectively, he shoved rape allegations under the carpet in the name of Christianity. It took me 20 years to pull my head out of the proverbial sand, but I can see clearly now all the harm Ken Starr has done, from the 1990s and now beyond, as he reaches for Mike Pence's presumed coattails. I don't know how much money I would bet on that, but whatever. Seeing him lend his practiced piety to a president who lies so much that he was considered by his previous lawyers to be a walking perjury machine, along with his sanctimonious religious liberty and crisis campaign that he is presently stumping around the country, he has made my story suddenly feel urgent. It's not just the hypocrisy, it's the damage Starr's sham moral authority has done to our nation, to our people. And remember those children his client separated from their parents and put in cages at the border? I must say, Judy's writing is a little scattered here, and she jumps from topic to topic in mid-sentence in ways that make it difficult to know. It would be difficult to follow along what she's talking about if we didn't already know all of these stories in the background. Again, is she talking about Starr? Is Starr conducting a sanctimonious religious liberty and crisis campaign? I think so. But then to jump over to the client, but we've been discussing his 5 different clients, and one of them is Jeffrey Epstein, and one of them is running the impeachment trial against Clinton, and then I guess Trump is a client, and she doesn't really, whatever. Anyway, it's painful to read through this, and it's actually, physically painful as well to read through this. It's very halting. My reading is very halting because she's also very florid in her language, more so than I would have. I guess if she had submitted the piece to an editor, it might have come out clearer. It's difficult to read. It's difficult to tell where she's going with each sentence. There's still more, though, and we're getting near the end. I don't know if Ken will lie about sex with me. That is, will he deny this affair? Presumably, he would not lie about it under oath after having a president impeached for doing the same. I would not presume that at all, by the way. I think it's a very bad presumption. And also at this point, I would interject and say, what happened to the ABC News reporter guy who you're friends with? What was it, Tim O'Brien? Would he deny that he saw you kissing in Italy? And could he answer the question of whether he saw Starr put your hand on his crotch? I mean, he may not be able to testify to that, but could he deny that it could have happened? And why has he, is he not going to speak up? Maybe now that this is written, he'll have something to say. I don't know. Anyway, she doesn't know whether Starr will lie about it. She makes the poor assumption that he wouldn't lie about it because it would be hypocritical after impeaching a president for it. But like Ken, she says, I do believe in God, and surely God will be ready with a roster of would Judy be lying if she said queries, such as he forced a sitting president to answer in front of the world. Whew, what a sentence, geez. All right. The inexplicably vulgar questions that were asked of a disgraced, red-faced Bill Clinton about cigars and oral sex were, of course, scripted by a young Brett Kavanaugh, who is now Starr's legacy on the Supreme Court. It is my fervent hope that every time Ken Starr enters a church, when he bows his head to pray, that he sees the faces of all the children and women who have been harmed and that he could have helped, but did not. I doubt he sees that. In my own view, he didn't see them because they were invisible to him. And perhaps one day the prophecy that Kavanaugh uttered in his confirmation hearings, what goes around comes around, will boomerang back on our mutual mentor as well before he harms us any further. Okay, a bit of a jumbled mess, but also a mess of a story. And what can I tell you? I guess this is being talked about and circulated all over the place. Ian Millhiser commenting on it and sharing it with people on Twitter, saying, my biggest takeaway from this takedown of Ken Starr and Brett Kavanaugh is that a huge amount of Trump's appeal is that lots of powerful men want to live in a world where they don't have to treat others, especially women, with basic decency. And that's, I guess, what makes them such Trump fans. It's an interesting observation. And, I don't know, I thought well worth noting. There's more, of course, out there worth sharing, but that one seemed like a big one that could easily have escaped if we didn't spend some time on it. I'm curious about going back to the Columbia Journalism Review piece about the tedium of Trump sucks books, but maybe I'll save that for tomorrow. It'll still be fresh and there'll still be more books coming, but I just wanted to note for the record that at least somebody else sees this as well. It's not just me making this up. Back to the happenings on Capitol Hill, just to stay on top of these things. I probably should have checked over at Daily Kos on the front page what, if anything, has been put together for this morning on that subject before, say, turning to Talking Points memo for their take on it, because that one was easy to find via Twitter this morning. I guess Daily Kos needs to do a little bit more of promoting their stuff on Twitter. All of it gets tweeted out, but I still end up turning to the Hill more often because they're just so aggressive in the way they do it. But maybe we should do the same. Or, I'm sure the thought is, let's not pollute Twitter the way the Hill does. But the Hill ends up getting the clicks that Daily Kos could be getting, at least for me. So maybe that would be a good idea. Let's see. Anything? No? This morning? I guess not yet. Maybe by later in the afternoon, there'll be more discussion about it. So that, I think, leaves us with TPM's take as the only one at the ready about the infrastructure and reconciliation deal. So I'll grab their report from this morning. Christina Cabrera writing, Senate Democrats land on $3.5 trillion reconciliation infrastructure proposal. I had a feeling that it's when they started to discuss lower numbers than Bernie Sanders' $6 trillion target that he was already openly discussing pulling back from that number. But I'm starting to wonder if it isn't part of a a plan perhaps to say, well, okay, if we lower the number on reconciliation now, we may end up bumping the number up again in the end, a little closer to the $6 trillion, especially if we don't get this, as Greg noted, BIF, it says bilateral, I think, rather than bipartisan, but bilateral infrastructure framework bill. In other words, the bipartisan compromise that was supposed to get through, and the compromisers and problem solvers, what have you, were supposed to find the 10 Republican votes to get this thing through. But instead, what's happened is the 5 Republicans who said they were generally in agreement with the framework are one by one beginning to reconsider and run away as the reality of a vote approaches, much less, so they're losing votes, much less, or that seems more likely than gaining another 5 anytime soon anyway. And I'm wondering whether, this is part of a plan for dealing with that and saying, well, all right, if it turns out that the Problem Solvers Caucus and the Mansions and Cinemas really do, in fact, fail to bring people along and they can't get votes for the bipartisan infrastructure plan, then we should move what we can of it, if there is anything, over into the reconciliation package. And if it bumps that up closer to the $6 trillion mark in the end, we say, well, we did lay the groundwork for a $6 trillion possibility earlier, and 3.5 seems to be doing just fine without much pushback from anyone significant at this point. So that's a great starting point. And if it goes back towards 6, well, we were talking about that before. We would have kept it separate and kept this down to the 3.5 that everybody started to say was going to be fine, but for the fact that no Republicans would go along with the bipartisan agreement anymore once it became a real possibility that it would pass. So let's see. What do we have here from Christina Cabrera? Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer announced last night that the Democratic senators involved in hammering out a reconciliation bill for infrastructure and a lot of other stuff landed on a $3.5 trillion proposal. Schumer stated that every major program that Biden originally proposed in his infrastructure plan is funded in a robust way. We'll see how robust. Mark Warner, key centrist in the negotiations, said the bill would be fully paid for, despite the fact that that's not actually necessary. Senate Budget Committee Chair Bernie Sanders declared that the budget was the most significant piece of legislation passed since the Great Depression, which is a hell of a statement, but also, by the way, just a reminder, it hasn't passed. But if it were to pass, then it would become that, I guess. The next step is getting all 50 Senate Democrats on board. Beyond the top line number, most of the details of the proposal are still unknown. That's the way it is with frameworks and budgets in general. Biden will discuss the proposal with senators today during a caucus lunch. Meanwhile, Republican senators are still playing the phony outrage game over Democrats doing both a bipartisan infrastructure bill and a reconciliation bill on their own, a move Republicans were well aware would happen in advance despite their current belly aching. The key analysis they present here: how Republicans hope to scam Democrats into committing political suicide. That's the title of the piece in the Washington Post. Is it from this morning about it? Let's go see what that one is. Of course, it's Greg Sargent's piece. It's actually yesterday, but updated this morning with the new details. Let's see. Okay. And there's that and much more. But this is one of those morning roundups. That's all we got on the infrastructure deal. So I guess we're up to speed on that front. And let me get to a couple of other stories that have been floating around out there that I thought you might find of interest. This one I can't read in depth because it's in the Wall Street Journal and I don't subscribe, but I thought I'd give you at least the headline and lead on this. Maybe you saw this one. Former banker found guilty of bribery tied to Paul Manafort loans. Subheader describes it this way: Stephen Koch, C-A-L-K, sought a Trump administration post as his bank approved $16 million for Manafort properties. So basically what's going on here, Paul Manafort needs to get a loan. No one will lend him any money because he's a financial train wreck. But this guy runs a bank and leans on the people there to approve $16 million in loans for Manafort in the hopes that Manafort will secure for him a top post in the Trump administration. And, well, it didn't work out. So, I mean, I guess that's a good thing. Rebecca Davis O'Brien is the reporter here. I'll give you the couple of paragraphs that sneak out underneath the paywall. A federal jury in Manhattan convicted a former bank executive on charges that he helped arrange $16 million in loans to former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort in exchange for getting a high-level job in the Trump administration. I don't think he got that job, but that was what he was aiming at. So I actually was interested in, well, what job do you think you would get? You're a banking, you're a banker, right? And you're going to make a stupid loan that you might lose out on, $16 million to Paul Manafort in exchange for what? I was just wondering, what does an a-hole like this think he's entitled to for something like that? And is it important? Is it not important? I'm just sort of curious. And what does it mean? What should we read into it? Well, let's go on. Stephen M. Kalk, the founder and former chairman of the Federal Savings Bank in Chicago, was found guilty on both counts he faced: financial institution bribery and conspiracy to commit financial institution bribery. Again, just for a second here, this is a jury in Manhattan convicts him. I don't know where he lives, but he's the chair of the Federal Savings Bank in Chicago. I'm just sort of curious about this. Did he live in Chicago and run the bank there? Or, I mean, this is entirely possible. This is just sort of the jet set world we live in. Was he a Manhattanite who nonetheless ran a bank in Chicago, either remotely or just flying back and forth, or just didn't give a crap about the actual community in which his bank was operating? He was just, milking it for money. What's going on here? I'm just sort of curious. Anyway, federal prosecutors said Mr. Kalk pushed the bank to approve the loans to Mr. Manafort despite multiple red flags because he hoped to be named Secretary of the Army. Oh, really? Just some, minor... I mean, it does say a top, position that he wanted in the administration. But, I mean, I just thought that was interesting all by itself, right? Support the troops, everybody. Nobody has greater love for the military than me. That you thought... I mean, I guess it ultimately didn't work on Donald Trump. But I mean, just the idea, and it's not an outlandish idea, that, Trump cared so little about, or this guy thought at bottom that Trump cared so little for actually running the military in some, in any way, or in a decent way, that he might in fact accept somebody from out of the blue as Secretary of the Army because he helped out Paul Manafort with some personal loans. I just, I find that kind of amazing. Oh, by the way, I've looked over at my comments here from Karen, who was chiming in on the reading of the Ken Starr piece. Did you get the author's name? I'll be providing a link to it, of course, later on. But what was it? I've already forgotten her name. Judy Hirschman, was it? Now I've forgotten already. But we'll get you that. And I guess she was asking, who wrote this piece? Were you also, Judy Hirschman, were you also just astonished at the writing about it, or were you just astonished at the stories she was telling? And then she answers the question of why Tim O'Brien has been silent. He's dead. Yeah, that's right. Didn't she mention that at the top of the story, that he's now deceased but was a good friend? So I guess that excuses him. we needn't wait around for him to chime in. And P.S. I just laughed at the fact that Tim O'Brien was dead. And I'm sure that they don't appreciate that. But okay, it was my own oversight and forgetting that we had learned about that I was really laughing at. Anyway, just turning back to that story about the guy who wanted to become Secretary of the Army this way. Where did that story go? There we go. Wall Street Journal. All right. Mr. Koch's lawyer, Paul Schuman, Schoeman, argued at trial that Mr. Koch thought he was making profitable loans, which were unanimously approved by the bank's loan committee, and said Mr. Koch wasn't acting in bad faith. Instead, Mr. Schuman said Mr. Manafort and one of the bank's loan officers were defrauding the bank that Mr. Koch had dedicated his life to building. So he's the victim in all this. Pretty much after that, the whole thing fades away and goes behind the paywall. So that's all there is to that one. And I don't really necessarily need to get behind the paywall to read the rest. I just wanted to note for the record that somebody really thought that they could get to be Secretary of the Army in the Trump administration by doing this. And I'm just thinking about that and like the people that he allowed to run the VA because they were Mar-a-Lago members, the shadow panel that runs the VA, including what was it, the Marvel Entertainment CEO, sitting down in Florida, just demanding answers of actual VA personnel from the club in Florida. And like, yeah, by the way, whatever. Support the troops. Not even the biggest hypocrisy in Donald Trump's life, of course, but or his administration for that matter. Just another one to add to the pile. All right, let's see. Just a few minutes left here, and probably no time to get too far into anything else. But, yeah, man. All right, well, I think that'll wrap it up, I guess, for today. Again, I recommend to you looking back on what went on with the Kraken sanctions hearing yesterday. It really was a spectacular show in that sense, and a lot of the lawyers watching the proceedings yesterday just astonished that there were officers of the court, lawyers, attorneys willing to say the stupid things that they were saying and fighting with the judge outright and openly during a sanctions hearing, which will just probably net them more sanctions. But again, maybe I should jump back to the rundown from yesterday on what was going on in the hearings, the blow-by-blow description. Is that still in my, here we go. Still in my pocket queue here. So up at the top, which was, again, this is in reverse chronological order. These are updates. As I recall, the judge ends up giving them not the shot at an evidentiary hearing. All the lawyers on the Kraken side spend the whole time. The upshot of the whole thing was the judge keeps asking, did you check the affidavits that you were submitting as evidence in your case to see whether it could even possibly be true? Did you vet any of the information? That was the crux of the arguments yesterday. And the Kraken lawyers basically saying, like, we're not responsible for the validity of the information in the affidavits. The affiant is, not us. But the judge pointing out your whole case is based on these accusations that people saw fraudulent activity. And you have, as your evidence, a pile of affidavits where people say that they saw this activity, but then the names of the people who say that sometimes is withheld. Or it's an affiant who's identified, saying, I heard from somebody else that this happened. Well, who did you hear it from? Well, an official. And that's all the information that they give. And did you check to see whether any of this stuff held up? And they said no. Well, actually, they wouldn't answer. They just said nothing. And the judge said, well, I guess that's my answer here. And the Kraken lawyers were of the opinion, they said, well, what you need to do is you should vet the validity of this information by allowing us an evidentiary hearing. We'll have a hearing about whether or not these affidavits and the evidence they profess to bring should be allowed at trial. But you're not even allowing us to get to that part. You're already sanctioning us. So they think they've been maltreated in all this. And the judge's point was just, look, this is a basic duty that every attorney has to file only claims that he or she has some reason to believe will hold together and contain valid points that would in fact prove a wrong that could be remedied. And there was that objection too. Like, so far you haven't even asked me for a remedy that I'm empowered by any law or the Constitution to award you. But on top of that, you're going to have difficulty proving that you are entitled to any relief at all because you haven't checked to see whether any of the evidence you intend to submit in support of your claim is real. And by the way, just to give you a flavor of some of it, so some of the affidavits, one of the more prominent ones offered up, came from, what was her name? Michelle Carone, was that her name? The woman in Michigan who was famously portrayed as having been completely drunk off her ass when she gave her testimony to that commission or to that committee meeting in Michigan. Remember, and it made it all the way to a Saturday Night Live skit where she was, screeching at them in the middle of questioning, have you even looked? Do you know how many voters are on the voters' rolls are real? Zero. I bet you didn't even know that. You remember that? We played the tape. She was hilarious. These are the affidavits that they were submitting, and boy, did they get spanked. I just wanted to give you a better flavor of what the argument was about yesterday. And the fact we have to wait for more briefing
Radio.com.
by itself is a disgrace.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, well, we're clearly going to have to talk about that another day and in another context, because it's time now to hand things over to Justice Putnam for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, by God. And you will see, well, let's see, it will be an interesting selection of stories from around the country and around the world, almost certainly because we spent so much time on the pervert Ken Starr.